Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. On the eve of another summer holiday, there'll be lots of fireworks over the next hour or so, as there's plenty to go around throughout the sports landscape, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And before I get started, whatever you may be doing throughout the course of this weekend, even if you're outside of the continental U.S. and beyond, have a happy, safe 4th of July as we get set to usher in the second big holiday of the summer. And before you know it, it'll be Labor Day. But let's not get crazy. Let's not forward the hands of time that rapidly just yet. So with all that being said, I hope it's a safe one and a happy one and a healthy on top of all that. So I have to get started with the baseball as we get into now what's going to look like a very interesting race in the American League East. And who would have thought that about 6 weeks ago, the Yankees, I believe their high water mark of the season was 7 games. And we understand it's only May. You can't win a division in May. You have to wait till you finally cross that finish line. If you happen to get those magic numbers dwindling down to a precious few, and then when it hits 0, in order for you to clinch through the division, then you can rejoice and celebrate not only winning a division, but looking forward to a postseason. Where right now, here on July the 3rd, the Yankees and their fans, I'm sure they have to be shaking their heads wondering what has gone wrong here. And I'll unpack what has happened and transpired, at least through my eyes, from what I have seen with the Bronx Bombers. But who would have thought? Monday, I even kidded that with the Blue Jays 3 games behind the Yankees, heading into this 4-game set up in Toronto, that if the Blue Jays were to sweep, they would be in first place all by themselves. And as it is, when we wake up today, depending on when you listen to this, guess what? At about 10:15, 10:30 tonight, you'll know whether or not the Yankees are going to be looking up at the Toronto Blue Jays, or they will at least exhale for one night heading into a Subway Series, which, I'm going to unpack that in a little bit. But for this Yankee team, I understand all the injuries with their rotation. I understand all that's gone on with Aaron Judge and their great start, and it seems like it's him and everybody else. And yes, as I talked about on the live stream yesterday, every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern time, for those curious, on YouTube. And for the Yankee team, that is feast or famine. You have a lot of guys that hit the long balls we've seen, whether your name is Trent Grisham, whether your name is Jazz Chisholm, and we could go up and down the lineup. Paul Goldschmidt has cooled off, although, listen, you'll take 284 and for him to be a productive bat there at first base. But other than Judge, it seems like nobody else is hitting. And the one guy that's getting the brunt of all this is Anthony Volpe. And I know it's a lot to put on this kid, considering that he is the guy since Derek Jeter left about 11 years ago. And even though with Didi Gregorius and Gleyber Torres, and you could throw in any other shortstop in between, and although Gregorius was a good Yankee, and certainly maybe he held up his bargain a couple of notches below Derek Jeter, because obviously to compare him to the great captain is blasphemous. But now that you have this guy, a homegrown Yankee, a guy that grew up a Yankee fan similar to Derek Jeter, and a kid that has made some hay here over the first couple of years and had his moments. But this year, for whatever the reason, he has now been public enemy number 1 on this team. And I think it's unfair. Now, granted, he's 23 years of age. He still has a lot of baseball in front of him. But for the brunt of the Yankee fan to point the finger at Anthony Volpe is a little unfair. Because for him to even come close to matching what Derek Jeter has done in a Yankee uniform is, seriously, are we going to start doing that? And I understand that it comes a point where you got to find your groove. You got to turn it around. And last night was a key situation where the Yankees, who were down 8-0 and 7-0 after the first inning, 8-0 after 3, and they clawed all the way back at one point to make it 8-7. And with runners on first and second, with Volpe up and 1 out, this was his time to do some damage. And what happened? He ground into a 6-4-3 double play, and that rally went kaput. And even though the Yankees came all the way back, down, like I mentioned, 8-0, and they actually tied the game going into the bottom of the 8th. But then what happened? They give up 2 runs thanks to Devin Williams, who tried to keep the tie going into the ninth inning, but what did he do? Walk a couple of batters, wild pitch, a run scores, then a base hit for another run to score to make it 11-9, and that's how the game ended. And even though there was a mild threat there in the top of the ninth, but it fell way short, as the Yankees now have lost 3 in a row in this series. They lost the first 2, Monday night 5-4, where Max Scherzer pitched 5 innings, but not to say that he was a guy that was turning back the clock to his old self, although he had no walks, 7 strikeouts, and he did pitch pretty good. And then Tuesday night for them to win and take a leap into the series where they had the first 2 games, and then last night, even after the big lead that almost went kaput, they ended up winning that game. And then tonight, you have Clark Schmidt on the mound to see whether or not that they could keep the Toronto Blue Jays at bay. Because if they don't come out of this game alive, they will be in second place. And who knows, they could even be in third place because the Tampa Bay Rays, with their win yesterday, are a half game back. And I have to check to see whether or not they're playing today. Tampa, they may have a day off and then start a series tomorrow. And of course, I'll go through the schedule in a bit. But yes, they do not have a game today. So therefore, if the Yankees, by any chance, lose this game tonight, where, like I said, it's in the hands of Clark Schmidt going up against Chris Bassett. And Bassett is a good pitcher. So we're going to have to wait and see. And I am actually riveted and fascinated. And it's bittersweet because if the Yankees, let's just say for argument's sake, lose tonight, 4-game losing streak, obviously they have not played well here throughout the last 3-4 weeks. And then they're going to go into a Subway Series at Citi Field tomorrow where either they're going to come in limping and will continue to limp, or all of a sudden they're going to get that boost from the fan base, they're going to get a boost from the ballpark, and then next thing you know, they're going to be mashing all over the place because the Met pitching that's going to match up against the Yankees this weekend is abominable. And again, we'll talk about the Subway Series in a little bit. But what's gone wrong with the Yankees here, and again, not pinning it all on Anthony Volpe, although he's the one, like I said, whipping boy as of right this very moment. But what it is that they haven't really hit. And even though yesterday they clawed back from 8-0 and Giancarlo had a 3-run homer to make it 8-3 to 8-6, and certainly made things interesting, but were unable to get that big hit after that. And I gave you the example of Volpe there. And even in the ninth inning, I know Trent Grisham got a hit and then ended the game there with Ben Rice, I believe, popping up to Vladimir Guerrero to end the game. Which if Rice would have gotten up, you would have had a situation where the tying run would have been at first and the winning run would have been at the plate with Judge up, and that would have been fascinating theater. But obviously we didn't get to that point. So now you have a situation where they can't hit, they can't get the timely hit, and then on top of that, you have a lot of guys who are feast or famine, and we know that this Yankee offense is a bully offense. They're the type that they are, I don't want to go as far as saying front runners, but when things are going good, yeah, they'll mash the ball all over the place. But when they actually need a big hit, a 2-out hit, a timely hit, it hasn't happened, or at least it hasn't happened during this stretch. And the pitching, all right, hasn't been great. When you look at what happened, Will Warren last night, he had to fight through 3 innings. He had to fight through that terrible first inning, of course. And them not getting the key starting pitching. Max Fried didn't pitch well the other night in the second game, and that was on Canada Day. That was the 12-5 game. How could I forget? Because when I was talking about this series, that was the afternoon game. For whatever reason, I had night game on the mind, and I couldn't compute what had transpired in the game. But yes, Max Fried certainly not looking sharp. And on Canada Day, where you had George Springer hitting grand slams and putting the Yankees to rest, and it's a scenario where it is looking ugly. And the bullpen, all these bullpens in baseball are getting taxed because of the analytics, and starters aren't giving you or providing any length. So therefore, this has been the recipe for disaster, especially in this series for the Yanks. And in the night, I mean, how do I feel good about the Yankees going into this game tonight? Considering they have Clark Schmidt, who in his last outing was awful, but he actually has been pretty good since his return from the IL. But I don't know which Clark Schmidt's going to show up. And I'm sure that the Jays, the fan base, are going to come out, support the team, to root them, to make sure that once this game is over, if the Blue Jays win, they're going to do whatever it takes to try to push them to get the first place, to stand there all by themselves, at least for one night. And Chris Bassett, like I mentioned, very good pitcher. I would say very good, but he's a solid Major League Baseball pitcher. And he is one that could certainly fool the Yanks, a lot of off-speed stuff. Doesn't throw relatively hard. He can probably top 94. But obviously with him, it's location, it's spots, and getting them off balance. And he could do that with a Yankee team that's scuffling. Who knows? Maybe that little uprising there where they scored the 6 runs, and maybe there's a glimmer of hope for the Yankees going into this game. Maybe the bats will wake up early to get off to a big lead, and then they can hang on to win. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But the Yankees right now, they are in a big-time free fall. And who knows? Could it get better with the Mets on the horizon? And briefly on the Mets, they split a doubleheader there yesterday. They got the nightcap, and that was a game they needed because they lost the first game badly, giving up grand slams in their own right to Joey Ortiz. But then in the nightcap, when they moved Lindor from leadoff to batting second, he hits a home run. You had Brandon Nimmo hit a grand slam. And the Mets, a little bit dicey there. They had a 5-0 lead, and they opened up with Huascar Brazoban, who has not pitched well as of late, coming out of the bullpen. But then you had Blade Tidwell, who pitched relatively well. Then he gave up back-to-back home runs, and then you had another run, and it got a little dicey for a moment. But the Mets were able to get a couple more runs. They win 7-3, and now they'll have the rubber match, I believe, this evening, not this afternoon. No afternoon games from the Mets, so we'll see what's going to happen there as the Mets try to take 2 out of 3 and win a series for the first time in what seems to be forever. And then now you have the Subway Series. And I know this is more of a localized thing. This isn't a situation where somebody in the Midwest or somebody out in the left coast, unless you're a transplant in New York, are going to care or look forward to the series. But with both teams struggling and both teams trying to find their footing, and especially with the All-Star break a week from this coming Sunday, that teams are going to want to try to at least close out this quote-unquote first half on a strong note. And when you look at the pitching matchups this weekend, it certainly bodes well for the Yankees to minimum win 2 games. Because tomorrow you have Paul Blackburn, a.k.a. Heartburn. He's going to go up against Marcus Stroman, and this is going to be his first start in forever, considering he's been on the IL with shoulder issues. But then the next 2 starts after that, no Fox game Saturday night and no ESPN game Sunday. So you can get the local broadcast. You don't have to worry about Joe Davis or John Smoltz or the Sunday night broadcast with Carl Ravitch there to close out your 4th of July weekend. But the Mets on Saturday, they will have Carlos Rodon, who's going to pitch for the Yankees. But for the Mets, you're going to have Frankie Montas. And you know you're going to have your fingers crossed and you're going to have sweat dripping down your beach because I'm sure his former teammates are going to try to do what it takes to just knock him out of the game early. And then Sunday, you have a scenario where Max Fried, where you know he's going to want to rebound from that start in Toronto. And then on Sunday, who are the Mets going to pitch there to close out the series and hopefully try to at least not go out on an embarrassing note? Yes, you guessed it. It's undecided right now because of the doubleheader that they had yesterday, and they had to move pitchers and had an opener there. So who knows who's going to toe the rubber for the Mets there come Sunday. So right now, it is looking like if the Mets get 1 game this weekend, you'd be surprised. And the 1 game that they could get could possibly be tomorrow, and that's if you hope Paul Blackburn gives you a decent outing. That means 4 runs in 5 innings, and that's not even decent. But hopefully the Met offense will pound Marcus Stroman, and maybe it'll be a slugfest to where the first to 8 runs will win the game. So right now, if you're a Met fan, you're just hoping that you don't get embarrassed here. That it's not a situation where the Yankees all of a sudden wake up from this weak slumber in Toronto, and who knows if that'll continue tonight up in T-Dot. But if it does, and they come back in second place, I'm sure they're going to be revved up, ready to go, and try to put away this Met team that is also a wounded animal, despite the fact that they won last night and got off the snide. So we'll see what's going to happen. You know, I'll recap it all on Monday. That's going to be the big focal point, at least for yours truly. And we'll take a look at the schedule in a minute. But other than that, in baseball, things are rather low-key. Not a lot much going on. I know you had Clayton Kershaw last night joined the 3,000 strikeout club. Congratulations to him. An illustrious career. You know he's going into the Hall of Fame on roller skates. And for him to actually get it on his 100th pitch, it's not as if he got his 3rd strikeout in the 3rd inning or struck out the side in the 1st. No, he had to laboriously get that 4th strikeout, where I believe he needed 4, and he got it there on a called strike to close out the 6th inning, and that was his final inning. I believe it was the 6th inning, may have been the 5th, but he struck out Vinny Capra there, the White Sox, and obviously resounding just congratulatory exaltation there for the future Hall of Famer. So congratulations to Kershaw on his achievement. Then you have Yordan Alvarez as the Astros continue to play well without him in the lineup. Now he's going to be out for even a more extended period on that broken right hand. He has to see a specialist. Who knows what the timetable is going to be for his return. So something to keep in mind there, even with the Astros doing pretty well and very well in the AL West, but having a big piece of their lineup out for a considerable amount of time. Obviously, you want him to get healthy. You want him to get back in the lineup when he's 100%, because the last thing you want to do is rush him back and then he gets hurt again, or goes out on a swing, and next thing you know, he re-aggravates it. So that is one thing that you certainly don't want if you're an Astro fan. And funny enough, now that I think about it, with the game last night in the Mets, they rocked Jacob Misiorowski, who I've talked about here the last couple of weeks. He of the 11 hitless innings to start off his career. Well, last night he got his comeuppance in his first loss, Major League career there at Citi Field, with the home runs by Nimmo and Lindor. So I almost forgot to mention that here as we pretty much close out the baseball segment. But before doing that, I want to take a look at the schedule, because the standings, other than the AL East, and maybe if I look here, no, everything is pretty much status quo. The Mets are 2 games behind the Phillies. Cubs, Brewers, 3 back are they of the Cubbies. Dodgers now are what, 9.5? No, 8.5 back, 8 in a loss to San Diego. So now they look like they're going to be off and running. Forget about the AL Central, as the Tigers have opened up a 12.5 game lead. So that could be put to rest. And the Astros currently have a 7-game lead, which is not going to bode well when we get to the All-Star break, because I'm going to have a lot of themes and storylines that may not be too juicy as we get to the second half. So just keep that in mind as we move it along here in this month. And as far as the schedule here for this week, and as we get set for Independence Day, you got some series that are going to close out today, as you know, which I don't have to get to. I don't know if there's any 4-game series, but let me get right to it. You have Boston at Washington. That's an 11:05 game. The Nationals always play that 4th of July at 11:05. I don't know why that's the case, but that's going to open up your 4th of July schedule tomorrow. Cincinnati at Philadelphia, good series there. And I know the Reds won last night as they had that suspended day-night doubleheader. And I believe, let me just double-check that. I believe the Red Sox actually won 2 out of 3. They did salvage that final game there yesterday, and that was the nightcap there. But you have Cincinnati, Philly, good series. St. Louis at Chicago, that's one to keep an eye on, because although St. Louis is behind Milwaukee in the division, but still, if they could do some damage throughout the course of the weekend, and they'd have to win minimum 2 games, but if they had a sweep, they could be maybe a game or 2 back. I'll double check the standings there to see how far back St. Louis is. Then you have, obviously, Mets, Yanks, Tampa, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Seattle, Texas, San Diego, Angels in Toronto, Detroit at Cleveland, although Cleveland's a million games back, Baltimore at Atlanta, Milwaukee at Miami. And Miami lost last night. They had an 8-game winning streak. Who would have thought, when they won the first game against Minnesota, but they lost 2-1 last night. So let's see in their rubber match, and that's actually a 12-10 game for those who care. Then you have Baltimore, Atlanta, Chicago, Colorado. Ooh, that's a world worst series, I guess, if you want to look at it from that perspective. Houston and LA, there you go, a little World Series rematch from 2017. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of storylines dredged up for that, even though they have played several times since, as we know. Kansas City and Arizona, San Francisco at the Athletics, not a BART series, the Bay Area Rapid Transit, because obviously that was the rivalry from the 2 teams on the other side of the Bay, but with the Athletics in Sacramento, I'm sure there's still going to be a little bit of that feel there with both teams. So you do have some interesting series this weekend, so we'll certainly take a look. And as far as the standings go in the NL Central, the Cardinals are 5 back but 6 in a loss. So yeah, they would need a sweep. They would only gain 1 game if they were to just win 2 out of 3. So something to keep in mind there as we head into the weekend, and we'll take a look at that come Monday. All right, now let's turn our attention, because we have some NBA and NHL free agency to get to, and I'll lace up the high tops and get to the NBA first. And the big storyline of these last few days, and I understand you have a lot of storylines, especially with LeBron, and I'll get to that in a minute, because now all the speculation about what LeBron's going to do and his representation, led by Rich Paul at Clutch Sports, have come out and said that, yes, although he's opting in to that $56 million deal, but he wants to see how the team is going to be constructed here in the early into the middle part of summer, to where if it's not to his liking, who knows? Could a trade request happen? Could it be a situation where he may look to greener pastures, knowing that he'll be 41 years of age by the time he gets to the end of the year, and obviously time is ticking. It's not as if he's going to play till 50, although he sure shows that in his workouts and the way he conditions himself and takes care of himself. But who knows? Now you're hearing the rumblings about maybe LeBron to the Knicks. You're hearing rumblings that he could go back to Cleveland and all this nonsense that I'm not going to really get into. And even Bronny James is being asked, oh, what's the situation with your father? And he's come out to say that, listen, I don't know what he's going to do. We don't really talk about it. I don't go on social media and read what's happening there. So they're taking the high road on that. At least Bronny is. So how I'm looking at LeBron's situation is that until I see some real talk, until I see something come down the pike where this is going to happen within a couple days, or this could happen overnight, or this, then I'll talk about it. Because all this Nick talk, or even, dare I even say, him going back to Miami, which I'm sure that's not even on anybody's radar, but how I look at it is that he wants to win. And he's going to go to a team that is ready to take that next step. And the Knicks obviously are one step away, and with the new coach that's in tow, that being Mike Brown, and we understand that Mike Brown and LeBron go back to his days in Cleveland. I don't know if that's a marriage that they may want to revisit, so you got to keep that in mind, Knicks fans. But all this LeBron talk is going to be maybe not all the rage, but certainly it's going to be percolating quite a bit here as we're into July, and who knows how far down the road that this will just crop up or will be, like I mentioned, on the surface to where it's going to be ad nauseum about LeBron and maybe him not staying in LA, despite the fact that they bring in DeAndre Ayton. All right, nice signing, but is that going to entice LeBron to stay? Because you have him, you have Luka, and they also brought in another big who I never even heard of, Jake Lavaria. So again, I don't think that's going to tickle LeBron's fancy. I'm sure they're going to have to do a little bit more than that. So we'll keep an eye. But the big story is the Bucks and them releasing Damian Lillard. And I don't think that was a surprise. Now, I think the surprise is that they're able to spread out the money over the next 5 years, the $113 million that they owe him. And for a lot of people out there that are thinking, wow, what loyalty to the Bucks. They just dump him on the side of the road. Lillard's getting paid. And with him being, 34, 35 years of age, and yes, he could work it out to the point where maybe he'll come back at the end of March if he's cleared and maybe sign on with a team that is looking for a playoff push. But the Bucks looked at it two ways. One, Lillard's not going to help us in the short term, and he has one more year after that, so might as well just cut bait now, which kudos to them for doing so. But number two, and even more importantly, is trying to appease their star player and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Because once they cut bait and they can spread out the money, now they can bring in somebody else, in which they did, starting off with the former Indiana Pacer Myles Turner, which was a bit surprising because based on some of the people I spoke to, Pacer fans aren't really that upset. They felt it as if he was going to go on to another team. Maybe not to stay in the same division, but for Turner, a big man that could not only take the three, but also get the board. We know he's more of a perimeter player now. Now, I don't know if that's enough to make Giannis want to stay there. Remember, he still has a couple more years left on his contract, so it's not as if he's going to demand or request a trade. Quite possibly that could be the case because based on a lot of the reports and even his post-season interview, he wants to be a Buck. He wants to stay in Milwaukee. He wants to finish what he started despite the fact that he won a championship 4 years ago. So I don't know what the front office is thinking. I would think that they're trying to do what it takes to keep Giannis happy and to try to bring in more players and try to construct a team. I know they signed Bobby Portis. They gave him an extension. And listen, Portis has been a part of that team for quite some time. I know you want to try to get some more blood, some newer blood, maybe even younger blood to get on the team. But the free agent market is not really all that. And it's starting to dry up, which I'll go through some of the signings that have transpired. But I thought that was a very good move by the Bucks because Lillard, who was there for 2 years and didn't really make his mark on the team, and I understand you had the changeover from coaches Adrian Griffin to Doc Rivers, and then he got hurt late in the first year in Milwaukee, that being Damian Lillard, and then going into this year, he had his moments where he started to pick up, especially middle of the season, because remember, the Bucks got off to a terrible start, and then he started to get into a groove, and then was hurt close to the end of the regular season. Then he comes back in the middle of that series against the Pacers, and then boom, there goes his Achilles. So I get it. You want to talk about, no loyalty in sports? Well, the NBA are littered with players with the whole player empowerment that they're ready to move on, join a super team. I want out. I request this, request that. So it goes both ways. So I don't want to hear for the pro owner to come out to say, oh, this is messed up. Or I should say the pro player aspect of, oh, this is messed up. Look what they did. They just threw them out like the trash. NBA players, they broker their own moves all the time. So I don't want to hear it when it comes to that. So let's see what's going to happen here with the Bucks as we move it along. But I thought that was interesting, knowing that Lillard wasn't coming back and that they have pivoted to bring in Myles Turner, and let's see what else they're going to do. But besides that, you don't really have any major big-time signings here that are going to wow you. Now, you had some re-signings, as you saw, where SGA now gets the highest paid annual salary. Now, he signed a 4-year, $285 million deal. Of course, that's not what Jalen Brown, he got more, and Jason Tatum got in upwards of over $300 million. But when you do the math, SGA is going to make, on average, a little bit over $71 million a year. God bless him. He's deserved it. He's earned it. And I understand it's an exorbitant amount of money. But of course, that's an industry where players are going to make that much, where the teacher, whether the fireman, whether you name it, the person that deserves more, they're going to be the one that's way on the outside looking in. And I mean, what more can you say? There isn't anything else you could say. And the same can even go towards Jaren Jackson Jr., the Memphis forward, to where he got a 5-year, $240 million deal. But now we find out that he had surgery for a turf toe and that his recovery is expected to be anywhere between, I think, 10 to 12 weeks, which is still 3 months and enough time to get to training camp and to get him built up and ready for the season. So lucky that for him that he's in recovery and doing that now and not later on after he signed this big time deal. So those are a couple of deals that were big time when it comes to big money, but both of those players stay home. And all these other deals, can I get crazy? Jacob Portal from the Raptors, he got 4 for 104, and very good player. Not a lot of people know who he is, big man, but all right, he stays in Toronto, and kudos to him. Nobody's going to go crazy over Jacob Portal, whether he moved elsewhere or stayed in Toronto. Now, the Brook Lopez of the world, he's one that leaves Milwaukee, so that's a void that was filled there by Myles Turner. 2 years, $18 million for the Clippers. I don't know what he's going to do there. Another veteran to that team. Lopez's play has slipped, his three-point shooting, etc., but he does provide size to go along with Ivica Zubac. So, and he's more of a perimeter player now than ever. That being Brook Lopez, but again, is another guy that you have from the perimeter that if he gets hot, could give you some instant offense, but we know very streaky, etc. Now, the other signings, I mean, the Nickeil Alexander-Walkers and the Luke Kennards going to Atlanta, is that going to tickle your fancy? Or D'Angelo Russell signing a 1-year deal with Dallas? That's just, to me, until Kyrie gets back. But all right, decent signing. And Denver, I thought, made out big time by not only trading Michael Porter Jr. to the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson, and Cam Johnson was ecstatic going to Denver, but then they also bring back Bruce Brown. I had Bruce Bowen on the brain. Bruce Brown, who was on the championship team 2 years ago. And then they also bring in Jonas Valanciunas, another big man that could also help out there with Nikola Jokic. And those are 3 very wise moves, I thought, by the Nuggets to add more depth, to add the bench help that they needed here, especially throughout the regular season and even into the postseason, despite the fact they got to a Game 7 in the conference semis against the now reigning champs. So I thought Denver did very well here in the opening days of free agency. And then the Knicks also added a little depth too with Jordan Clarkson, a guy that could provide some relief off the bench, could score. And I thought that was a very good move, as well as Gershon Yabusele, the former Celtic and then Sixer, who actually contributed there on that Sixer team. Not a lot of people noticed because the Sixers were awful. So, and he also adds some size, he could shoot the 3. So the Knicks now trying to see what they could do to bolster their roster in order for them to get to the next level next year. And before I even segue to the new Knicks head coach, Duncan Robinson signs with Detroit. You also had Karis LeVert go there, which makes you wonder what Miami's doing, and they are out to sea. I think they had a big tide there in South Beach just hovered over the arena there by the bay, and it's washed out whatever hopes, dreams, aspirations that the Heat were planning to do to get themselves back into some sort of relevancy, because right now they have done nothing. And not to say Duncan Robinson is Mark Price or is a sharpshooting three-pointsman. And yes, he's had his moments in the league, and yes, he can't shoot the three. But going to Detroit, I'm sure will help with Malik Beasley now under investigation for a federal gambling probe. So we got to see how that's going to shake down. I didn't really talk about that because I didn't know much about it. So Detroit gets a little bit better, and Caris LeVert is a very good player. Bounced around a lot from his days in Brooklyn, but still, when he's healthy, could certainly contribute. So I like those two signings there. And Dennis Schrader goes to Sacramento for $45 million. I believe that's 3 years. And that's what you have. Those are a bunch of the big signings. If there were some lesser signings that fell under the radar, my apologies. But now let me segue to the Knicks head coach. And I talked about this, if you haven't, fully in depth with some commentary. And there's going to be a theme here, people, with commentary. Not only today on this podcast, but moving forward outside of the podcast. So just keep that in mind and stay tuned to that YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. So please subscribe if you haven't done so. But for the Knicks head coach, this was one that I'm sure the Knicks fan, I haven't really talked to a lot of Knicks fans because the news just broke yesterday afternoon. And based on what I've seen on social media, it's been actually quiet, which I've been surprised. But as much as you could look at this hire and say, oh, Mike Brown, what is this guy going to do? This guy's been tossed around left and right, upside down, everywhere. Obviously, a lot of these guys are recycled. And you're not going to bring in a hotshot assistant as they try to interview that Minnesota assistant off of Chris Finch's bench, which I guess didn't work out well, obviously, because your new coach is Mike Brown, most recently the Sacramento Kings. And how I look at Mike Brown's arrival is one of, I'm going to go as far as saying, yes, hope, because you can only hope that whatever he's learned along the way, including an NBA Finals appearance way back in 2007, 18 years ago, when he had LeBron James go up against the San Antonio Spurs in one of the worst finals teams ever. But they still got to a final, so give it up, and Mike Brown was a part of that. And then for him to not only coach the Lakers there in the early 20-teens with Kobe Bryant at the end of his career, on top of him being an assistant at Golden State when they won the championship 2 years ago, his time in Sacramento where he won Coach of the Year and then was unceremoniously jettisoned after what surfaced of a video between he and De'Aaron Fox where there was a disconnect or disagreement. And from what I saw, it didn't seem anything that was damning or anything that was like, ooh, wow, that looks like that could be curtains for Mike Brown. No, I didn't see anything of that. And then, of course, weeks after that, they send De'Aaron Fox to San Antonio. But the reason why I say hope, and even there's cautious optimism, because Mike Brown has been around the block. And I understand New York is a different beast altogether. And even though he coached in LA and not much success there, and we know that the success of this team recently getting to a conference final, 2 wins from an NBA final, that the Knicks fan, they're looking at an NBA final next year. Minimum conference finals, as we know. And for Mike Brown to come in here and try to be the guy that's going to take him to the next level, I know could be a bit of a stretch, a bit of a reach. But I think he's the right guy for this reason. Because he has a solid track record. Maybe even a good track record. Very good? Maybe it's a little bit below that. But he's not a guy that has not had success. He has had success. So you can look at the recent rash of coaches that have been shown the door that have won championships in this decade. The Frank Vogels, the Mike Budenholzers, and the Michael Malones of the world. And yes, you can have those guys come in, but how have they done in their next stop after? Now, this is not including Mike Malone because he hasn't had another job after getting fired, with 3 games left in the season? So he hasn't gone to that next destination to see whether or not he could get back to an NBA final. But for Vogel, who went to Phoenix and then fizzled out, and for Budenholzer, after winning a championship in 2021, where Vogel won in 2020, and Vogel, when he went to Phoenix in that 1 year, no good, he got the hook. And then Budenholzer, the same fate, beats the Phoenix Suns in 2021, then is hired as the coach before last year, and then he gets the hook this year. So you don't want a guy that's going to be that retread that has won a championship, and then now you have to see whether or not he's going to win a championship for your team, where, all right, he has a little bit of a pedigree and that recent track record, but there are no guarantees. And I understand the same can be said for Mike Brown, but he's had a lot of stops along the way. And one thing that I'm sure he's going to want to do is to prove himself, to say, hey, I'm the guy. I'm the one that's going to take this team to the next level. I saw what happened here over the last couple of months, how they got to a conference final, how they got to a game 6, how they actually should have gone to a game 7 considering they blew game 1. But here's the thing, and I want to remind Knicks fans this. Now, unless Mike Brown does something just boneheaded, something that just racks your brain, if for whatever the reason, Mike Brown and the Knicks next year do not make it to a minimum game 6 of a conference final, and dare I even say lose in the conference semis, it is not all on him. Look to James Dolan, Leon Rose, and William Wesley. Look to those 3 guys. Because the guy that they fired 3 days after them losing to Indiana is the one that shouldn't have been let go. And therefore, blame them for the Mike Brown hire, not Mike Brown for the job that he's about to do here with this Knicks team. And I understand that unless he does something boneheaded, unless he does something that is just way out of anybody's proportion, that you could solely point the finger at Mike Brown, all right, fine. Then he's going to have to take culpability of that. But if they lose a hard-fought Eastern Conference semis, let's say, I'm just throwing the Bucks out there. They lose in 7 games, whether it's at home or in Milwaukee, and it was tooth and nail to the end, but the Bucks had the last shot and they actually won on that last shot. Are you going to blame Mike Brown for the reason why they didn't get to a conference final? No. Look at the front office first before you can even look at that coach. Now, that's all I got with the NBA. And quickly, the WNBA, I'm just bringing this up. I didn't watch the game, but I have to just mention this, that the Indiana Fever, without Caitlin Clark, won the Commissioner's Cup over the Minnesota Lynx. And the Lynx was a WNBA finalist last year, if you know. So that was actually a surprise. I know Clark has had injuries, and I know there's been a lot of back and forth and squabbling with Clark and competitiveness and being picked on, etc. And I know I was going to talk more WNBA coming into this year, and I know I haven't really touched on it, but I just wanted to make a mention of that. And it's no big whoop because that's their version of the NBA in-season tournament cup. All right, fantastic. But I thought it was interesting how Clark wasn't on the team and didn't play in the game, but they still won that Commissioner's Cup. Now, if they could only have that success in the postseason, and I'm sure the ratings would be through the roof, if Clark playoffs, go deep, maybe even get to a final, who knows what that will do for the league, despite the fact that the league's doing very good as of right this very moment. So I wanted to throw that in there as well. All right, now let's lace up the skates. NHL with their free agency and what's going on there. And to me, the big story coming out are the Florida Panthers. And I don't know what their cap situation is. I don't know what they're doing with the money. But when you look at what they have done here, prior to Monday, they signed or re-signed Sam Bennett, 8 years. I believe on average a little over $8 million a year. So do the math, that's over $64 million. And then Aaron Ekblad, who I thought maybe they would pivot, because he's been under scrutiny with suspensions and whether it's with, I believe, PEDs, allegedly. But I know he's also had some hits where he had to sit out and take some time off. And although he's been a mainstay there as a backliner for the Panthers for a long time, but he also gets a big-time 8-year deal. And then on top of that, Brad Marchand, who got there 5 minutes ago, they said, you know what, Brad, we're going to give you a 6-year deal. It's a little bit under $30 million, but guess what? Marchand is 37 years of age, so that contract is going to put him to 43. What is he going to be, the next Jaromir Jagr? And listen, that's no knock on Marchand, and maybe, hey, he keeps himself in great shape. Maybe he feels he has 6 years. I don't know if he went into the office and said, hey, guys, I can play 6 years, or who knows? And that's why I say the cap that they have, now I don't know if they're going to bring back Seth Jones. He's a guy that's also a free agent at this very moment. But they bring back a big chunk of the team that is certainly going to do their best to three-peat, and as I mentioned, has not seen in the likes in the NHL since 1983. So way too early to even talk about a three-peat, but if they're going to bring back these players that have been mainstays, and even one that they brought in late in the season that played a huge part, especially in the Stanley Cup Final, then you know what? Right now they're off and running and looking like a team that could three-peat as of right this very moment. But the other big story, too, was Mitch Marner. He is not a Maple Leaf. He got traded to the Vegas Golden Knights. And in return, they got Nicholas Waugh, a guy that I don't really know too much about, so my apologies there. But Marner is the big key here because he was the poster boy for futility, especially in the postseason when it comes to the Maple Leafs throughout this last, 8-9 years. And for Marner, he gets a big payday, 8 years, $96 million. Who knows? Maybe with him not having to be the guy there, and even though he's going to be expected to contribute big time, especially now he's getting the big bucks, but maybe Marner, change of scenery, different atmosphere, playing in Sin City, who knows? Maybe all the pressure will be off, knowing that Toronto in its own right is a pressure cooker, knowing that they have not been to a Stanley Cup final in forever, haven't won a Stanley Cup final going back to 1967, and knowing that he doesn't have to be a part of that anymore, he could just say, thank God I am away from there and I can just start over. And he's actually going to play with a team, as we know, won a couple of years ago, but have not been able to get back or even anywhere close to a conference final or cup final since. And granted, it's been 2 years, but still, so I thought for Marner, who knows, maybe this could be a little bit of a revival for him. So we'll have to wait and see once the season begins and how he plays it out here with that 8-year big-time $96 million contract. And then the Rangers traded their defenseman Keandre Miller to Carolina. They get first and second round picks back for next year. And it is top 10 protected, so it's not a situation where if Carolina all of a sudden falls apart and they end up in the lottery and it happens to be in the top 10 that the Rangers are going to get that pick. No, that's not the case. They do get a prospect in return, Scott Morrow, defenseman, young kid, 22 years of age. So let's see how that plays out for the Blue Shirts as they try to get themselves together on the new head coach Mike Sullivan, formerly of the Penguins. And then you had a couple other signings. Patrick Kane re-ups with the Red Wings 1 year for $3 million. Michael Granlund, who was formerly at Dallas, goes to Anaheim on a $21 million deal. And Pius Suter, who had a big year with Vancouver, scoring 25 goals, he goes to St. Louis to see if they could piggyback what they did, especially in the second half of the season, and came this close from beating Winnipeg there in that opening round, if you recall. So those are pretty much the moves. Again, if there are any other off-the-radar moves that I did not pick up, my apologies. I know Alexander Romanov signed an 8-year deal with the Islanders. I mean, that is a hefty contract, and I understand they had a trade for him there a couple of years ago, but he hasn't been a guy that's really been lights out, and a lot of people thought that he was going to be much more of an offensive defenseman and pick up his game there on that side of the rink than defense, but he hasn't really shown that, especially last year. What do you have, 24 points total, 4 goals? That is a paltry amount, and he got an 8-year, I believe, $50 million deal. So just keep that in mind, Islander fans, as we try to see what we could do. All right, obviously with the draft, we talked about that on Monday, hit a grand slam, but when it comes to trying to get other players to get themselves better, to get themselves to a point where they could be a bit of a threat in the Eastern Conference, well, right now, they're still light years ahead when it comes to that. So that's what you have with the hockey, and no news on Connor McDavid, which is even the bigger story, but obviously his camp and no quotes coming out of him July 1st, or even Edmonton for that matter, which would be bigger than anything because the Oilers now could offer him the most money going into the last year of his contract, and nothing has been said, heard, or even a peep, whether it is from the Oilers or even from McDavid. So right now, all's quiet on the Western Front when it comes to those two parties, but I'm sure maybe something will pick up as we get deeper to the summer. If that's the case, you know I'll be all over that. All right, now let me break out the tennis racket, people, because I want to talk some Wimbledon before I get to the NFL. And we have had some big-time upsets early on here, and especially on the women's side, and that's where I want to start. Because it's not only just Coco Gauff. The top 5 players on the women's side. I mean, think about this. And I understand tennis, people may tune me out here or may wait for the NFL. That's why I saved the NFL for last, because that Steeler trade the other day, commentary, if you didn't watch on YouTube, I'll get to that. So that's why I'm going to keep you a little bit suspended here. As for Wimbledon, do you know that 4 of the top 5 women's players are already out of the tournament? That's right. So that means you have Jessica Pegula, who was the first one out in the first round there on Monday, and she's the earliest exit at a major since 2020, considering where she's ranked. And she lost to Elisabetta Cocciaretto. Let me see if I say that pronouncedly. She's the Italian girl. And she lost straight sets, 6-2, 6-3. And the crazy thing is that Pegula came out and said that, I didn't think I played that bad. And I'm thinking to myself, did you watch the match? And listen, I understand that she's not going to kill her play. She's not going to, and I didn't watch the match, obviously, but based on just a couple of highlights that I saw, and for Cochereta, who I've never seen play, obviously put up a big-time performance against a top-ranked player, just goes to show you that I think, from afar, that Pegula took her lightly. So that's the only reason that I could come out and say why Pegula did not at least get to a third set with her, and then obviously bowed out there in that opening round. And the biggest story is even Coco Gauff. And this one, I'm going to give her a bit of a pass. And you know me, I'm a hard judger when it comes to stuff like this. Coco Gauff, as she comes off of her French Open win, and yes, we could talk about the turnaround time. It was 4 weeks, and obviously taking a lot of bows and a lot of bouquets thrown away. She got her second Grand Slam win in her back pocket. But for whatever the reason, she decided to come into this tournament to go up against an opponent, Diana Yastremska, and she took care of her in straight sets as well. Now, the first set was a tiebreak at 7-6, but for Yastremska to get past that, and then in the second set, just dominate to beat her 6-1, makes you think, Coco Gauff, what happened here? And in the post-match interview, she did say that she was not necessarily mentally exhausted, but she was mentally overwhelmed over the last few weeks, considering she won the French Open and didn't have enough time to get ready, to prepare, etc., that she'll take this as a learning lesson and will look at this moving forward, that no matter what tournament, and more so French to Wimbledon, because once Wimbledon ends a week from this Sunday, July 13th, you still have at least a 6-7 week stretch from the end of Wimbledon to the US Open in Flushing. Whereas with the French, you literally have 4 weeks, barely a month, to prepare if you do happen to win that tournament and then get yourself ready for the next tournament. So that's what I'm going to look at here. She's a young girl. She's 22 years of age, or she's 21. She's about to be 22. I think she is 22 right now. So I'm not going to kill her and to say, oh, you should have known better, or Coco Gauff, come on. All right, you could go on the Today shows and Good Morning America and go through the whole circuit and celebrate your win, and rightfully so. And she did do that, I'm sure, to the fullest. And then when it came time to, oh, wait, Wimbledon is now 2 weeks away, or less than 2 weeks away, I got to gear up. And maybe she took her first round opponent lightly, although she said she faced her in another tournament on the red clay and she knew how good she was. But yeah, she was not able to get in sync, especially after that first set. So for Gauff, I'll give her a pass here. And I can understand people wanting to kill her. Oh, you should have known better, you should have prepared. I mean, she's 21 years of age, people, 22. So I can see if she was 25, 26 seasons, she has a few tournaments under her belt, and at that point you say, all right, Coco, you should have known better. But you know what? Now, I'll let that one slide. If that happens 2-3 years from now, where you win a French and then you get ousted in the first or second round at Wimbledon, I'll say, all right, Coco, what's your excuse here? Or what's the reasoning? I shouldn't say excuse, but you know where I'm coming from. So that was the big loss there on the women's side. And then you also had the 4th and 5th ranked players in the world also bow out. That being the Italian Jasmine Paolini and the, let me pronounce her name correctly because you know me with names, people, Jinwen Zheng from China, as they both are out. So now that leaves you a few others that are out there, the Madison Keys and Elena Rybakinas and a couple others that seem to be missing off the top of my head. You still have Naomi Osaka out there. Maybe she can make a run. Who knows when you have those top flight players out. But when you have Aryna Sabalenka, the #1 ranked player, the top one standing out of the last one standing out of the top 5, and knowing that she had that meltdown or mini meltdown at the French, now it's her tournament to lose, or at least so you think. And I wonder if there's going to be any pressure or any snakes in her head to know that. And even she said in the post-match, wow, I'm surprised that all these players are gone. And it kind of leaves her with maybe a little bit of added pressure. And we know that she could get those snakes in her head to the point where, is she going to be as sharp? Is she going to not look at her opponent any lesser? Or is she going to try to do her best to dominate and steamroll the field, considering that now she is a heavy favorite to come out and win this tournament? Interesting. You know, we'll keep that in mind here as we move it along, as we're now getting into the weekend of this tournament. But something to keep in mind with Sabalenka because she's one that she could get in her thoughts and in her feelings in the middle of a match as she did so against Coco Gauff at the French. So who knows if she has one of these unranked women's players or maybe someone that she takes lightly, and here she is battling it out in the third set, and it's going to be a tiebreaker, and she can't get out of her own way, and unforced errors and double faults, which what happened to Coco Gauff yesterday. I believe she had 29 unforced errors and 9 double faults. So this just goes to show you that she was not locked in, not focused at all. So for Sabalenka, we'll see and monitor that the rest of the way. As far as the men's side goes, you had another big upset there with Alexander Zverev, the number 3 ranked men's tennis player in the world. And this one is a little bit, you got to be concerned here because Zverev, and I'm going to bring Sabalenka back into this because Sabalenka, who, as I mentioned, has her own demons and things that she fights through sometimes in the middle of these tennis matches. Well, Zverev, in his post-match, and that was an epic. I mean, you talk about a fight battle to the end. If this was a semifinal or a final, this would probably rank up there. But because it's an opening round match, it's not going to get the flair, it's not going to get the dramatic effect that you would get if this was deeper into the tournament. But Zverev, he lost his first round match to Arthur Rinderknecht, and here's a guy that I never heard of. First time I'm hearing of him. But Zverev loses, get this, you ready? 6-7, 7-6, 3-6, 7-6, and 4-6. So the 2 sets that he won were tiebreak sets. He lost the first set in a tiebreak, and then loses 6-4 in the final set, to where Zverev, now this is where it gets interesting, because in his post-match interview, he came out and said that he has not been feeling himself as of late, dating back to the Australian. Now you're talking almost 6 months here. And for whatever the reason, he even expounded on that, saying that he hasn't felt right, he's felt off. That, let me see if I can pull up a quote here, that he's been struggling mentally since the Australian Open, and here's his quote. He said that it's difficult to find joy outside of the tennis court for me at the moment, and that he's lacking joy and feeling empty. And this is where Sabalenka came in, because she had heard his comments and had to bring it up in her post-match interview after her win yesterday, I believe. And she said that, I just wish Alexander Zverev well. I hope he finds therapy. I hope he finds support from his family, because that's what's helped me in my journey, not only being as a human being, but also as a tennis player, because to manage those emotions, to manage just everything that encompasses an athlete, even just a person trying to live in this world and what's going on, etc., outside of the white lines. And for Zverev, and I'll say this, I know he's not watching or listening, but we're all with you. Let's just hope that between now and the U.S. Open that he finds some help, that he seeks some refuge, whether it be from close family members, whether it be from friends, whether it's on the tour, on the circuit, or outside of that. And hopefully they are friends. They're not yes men. They're not guys who are just going to agree with him because of who he is, that they're going to say, no, you need to seek some help. Or no, I got someone that I can refer you to. Those are friends. So we're in your corner there, Alexander. And I know you're a top flight player. And I know that had to be just a grueling defeat. And you have to sit on that. And hopefully it does inspire a lot of control to the point where it becomes drastic. That's all I'll say. And we know he's had his own battles with domestic violence abuse or alleged domestic violence abuse off the court, and now him coming out saying that he's just been off and he's lacking joy and at the moment it's just not fun. Well, one more time, I just hope that that's the case where he does seek help and does come to the conclusion that looking from within, the only way that you're going to find that peace is by doing that work, but also getting the help from a professional or even just from that support from loved ones. And hopefully he does do that here in the coming days, not in the weeks and months, in the coming days, to get himself back on track. And then you also had Lorenzo Mazzetti. He was the one that was going up against Carlos Alcaraz in the semis at the French. He is also ousted, and this guy, I'm going to butcher his name, Basil, he lost, and no disrespect to the guy that, Basil Lashvili, that's his last name, his first name. Guys, you know me. So for Mazzetti, who had a good run there at the French, out, and he's the 7th ranked player in the world. And even Carlos Alcaraz, he had a tough time there in the first round against Fabio Fagioni, where he beat him in the fifth set. He destroyed him 6-1, but after losing the fourth set 6-2, that was a mano-a-mano back and forth. So who would have thought his opening match went the distance, 5 sets, but at least he closed out strong, winning 6-1. But Fagioni, or did I pronounce that right? Oh, Fognini. I said Fagioni, so my apologies. Fabio Fognini gave Carlos Alcaraz all he could handle. So that's what you have there with the Wimbledon. And you know I'll be on top of that deep into the weekend and recap it there on Monday. But a lot of upsets, a lot of intrigue, and let's see what, especially on the women's side, what that could do going into next week, whether or not you're going to have a Cinderella story, somebody come up the ranks and surprise someone, or it's just going to be Sabalenka's tournament to lose and she dominates everybody and cruises to a Wimbledon victory. And then now, let me put on my helmet and shoulder pads to close it out here with the NFL. And going back to the theme of commentary. Yes, I talked about a commentary with the Knicks head coach, or the new Knicks head coach, and a one Mike Brown. And you can see that on my YouTube channel. It's a little bit less than 12 minutes, which is the same amount of time that you would be able to digest. And it's become a very popular video on my channel, which I appreciate those who follow, or even who haven't followed, who watched, because the little engine that could, just trying to get those YouTube subscribers up there to 1,000 and to monetize, you know me, as an independent podcaster doing this full time. Just throwing little hints out there, people. But I also had a commentary on the Steeler trade. And the headline was, or the title was, who the hell do the Pittsburgh Steelers think they are? This trade for Jalen Ramsey and the tight end Jonnu Smith, who they've had on their radar dating back to the draft, as there were a lot of reports that the Steelers could trade for Jonnu Smith, and then that fell apart and whatever, and then now it revisited to the point where Jalen Ramsey comes to Pittsburgh, where Minkah Fitzpatrick and a draft choice goes to Miami. And there were a lot of reports about Minkah, that Christmas Day game. That's when a lot of it surfaced, where it seemed like it was 10 guys plus one on that defense, to where it seemed Minkah Fitzpatrick phased out, whether it's the coaching staff, teammates. And if you read between the lines, it looked like Fitzpatrick was the guy that just had enough. And there weren't a lot of rumblings. Obviously, the Steelers kept Fitzpatrick's availability close to the vest. And then here it was when on Monday, I get a text from my dear friend, Kevin Christopher. I've called him Kev, a.k.a. the Viking fan, where he sent me a text saying Ramsey with exclamation points. So I said, uh-oh, the Steelers must have gotten Ramsey, or maybe the Vikings for that matter. And then I see that Minkah went the other way, and Ramsey coming to Pittsburgh. Watch the video, and you'll get a full unpacking of the Steeler trajectory, especially with the front office and this trade, but I'll just talk about the trade itself. Twofold. One, I actually like the trade. If Minkah was a part of the problem, more so in the locker room, maybe a little bit on the field, missing assignments or being over-aggressive or not being too aggressive, whatever it may be. I think about one touchdown to Xavier Worthy that it kind of made you wonder, where was Fitzpatrick on that play, even though Cam Sutton could have been the guy in the slot that may have blown the assignment. But for whatever that is, how I look at it, you bring in Jalen Ramsey, who I'm sure will be geeked up, ready to go. He put up a nice video there on Twitter, which had me pumped up, ready to go for the season, even though I could certainly wait for week one where the Steelers will play the Jets. And obviously there's a lot of juicy storylines there that I don't need to get into. But for Ramsey, I understand. You got to deal with his attitude. I don't want to say attitude, that's too strong. You got to deal with him as a person. And I think Mike Tomlin will get through to him. But he can be moody. Can be a little sullen. So you got to deal with that, Steeler fans, and I understand that. But hopefully he comes in, ready to go, good soldier, ball out, and that's that. And Jonnu Smith, listen, another weapon to the offense. As long as Aaron Rodgers stays upright with that young offensive line, who knows? Maybe Jonnu Smith could even come close to matching what he did in Miami, where he put up record numbers for receptions, yards, and touchdowns as a tight end. And he's not your prototypical tight end, Jonnu Smith. He's more of a hybrid guy, more of a slot receiver, or you can probably put him outside as well. But for the Steelers, I thought this was a good trade for them. I mean, why not? The Steelers have done what they could to try to improve this team in a loaded conference and an even loaded division. And there are, now here's the second part of this. These Steeler fans that are out there saying that, oh, I don't like this deal. Ramsey, he's a troubling guy. He's hard to root for, which there could be some truth to that. But we know that he's an all-pro type player. And he's a former All-Pro at that. Hopefully he can recapture a little bit of that here in Pittsburgh. And whether it's DK Metcalf, whether it's building through the draft and what they did, I understand Aaron Rodgers. That was one that it just worked out that way, considering Rodgers had no team to go to, and the Steelers were the last team standing. So therefore, it was a match made in hopefully heaven. And then now you bring in Ramsey and a tight end for a disgruntled player. Why not? Taking chances, roll the dice, because let me tell you something. If Jalen Ramsey went to the Rams, as was reported that he would have a second go-around with his former coach Sean McVay where he won a Super Bowl, then I'm sure Steelers fans, despite the fact Darius Slay and Joey Porter Jr. are already on the roster, but I'm sure there may be some people to say, oh wait, the Steelers going to get him? Oh wait a minute, if Jonnu Smith, let's just say if he went to LA, then people are going to say, well wait, how come we couldn't get him? You can't have it both ways, Steelers fans. So you have to give it up for Omar Khan on what he's done. He's tried to improve this team. He knows how competitive the division is with Baltimore and Cincinnati there. And on top of that, with Kansas City, with Buffalo, with maybe an upstart LA Charger team. Who knows about the Jets, although they're probably not going to do too much there anyway. Miami, you would think they're going to take a step back as they lost too much personnel. But you have a big-time conference. The Texans, they can't get out of the divisional round, but still. Jacksonville looking to rebound. You got Travis Hunter, maybe Trevor Lawrence, who knows? So yeah, I don't want to hear it, Steeler fans, that, oh, we're an old folks team. Oh, what are we doing here? Nonsense, because if the Steelers were just sitting on their hands like some other teams in the league, and I won't mention any teams' names or whatever, that say they're going to make moves and say they're going to do things and then don't do them, or they're kind of so-so moves, at least they're trying. Because what we've seen with the Steeler team over the years, yes, 10-7 is nice. Yes, Mike Tomlin doesn't have a losing record, but he's trying to get this team to 11-6, 12-5, and maybe even win a division at 12-5. Who knows? And if they do so, at least they'll host a playoff game. Does it guarantee you a win? No. But it beats being a 6th or 7th seed, having to go to Buffalo or Kansas City and losing every year. Or in this case, last year, losing to the Ravens in Baltimore as a 6th seed. So, can't have it both ways, Steeler fans. I like the trade. I understand it has to be like the perfect setting and a somewhat perfect storm in order for everything to go right. Because if the Steelers start off, let's say, 3-6, and Jalen Ramsey's body language isn't right, and Aaron Rodgers, he's also another one with terrible body language if things aren't going well. So yeah, I get that. But at least right now, you could say, all right, let's see what we got with this team and let's go. As opposed to just saying, well, this is what we have, and all right, it's going to be another 9-8, 10-7 year. Who knows? Maybe it could be a 12-5 season. We still have plenty of time between now and training camp to even figure it out. And now that I think about it, training camp is now, 3.5 weeks away? So, certainly not looking forward to that, because summer's just started. It's getting hot, and I'm loving every second of it, and I hope you are too as we head into this 4th of July weekend. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the toy department of life called sports. And if you haven't done so, as I've mentioned throughout this podcast, people, I implore you, please subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com, of course, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. A lot of content coming your way, especially on the YouTube channel, so definitely tap in, lock in, dial into that channel, as there's going to be plenty down the pike, including tomorrow. I'm going to have my first critique video, which I'm going to try to wrap up today. It's a short one, but it's going to be juicy. I talked about it a little bit on the live stream. You could go back on the live stream and watch, leave a comment there, and it was very good. It was over an hour and a half. It was a lot of fun. Join in on that, people. That is a good time. We got people bantering back and forth in the chat room, talking about what's happening in sports. So I implore you to do that as well. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: on YouTube at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or JAYREELZ on Instagram, JAYREELZ1, just the number, on Twitter, and the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA. As I always like to say, talking sports is birth. Delivering nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.